Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. 1 dead, 5 hospitalized as missiles strike Odessa in renewed Russian attack. Russia destroys a U.S.-made radar station in Ukraine, and U.S. President Biden signs Ukraine Lend-Lease Act. We begin this morning with news that Russian shelling has injured 1 civilian and 1 policeman in Luhansk, and that's according to the region's governor. Sergei Hedai wrote on Telegraph that a shell hit and caused a fire at the region's premises of the National Police. Meanwhile, in Shipolovo, Russians opened fire on police who were inspecting damage from previous days' shellings, and 1 employee was injured. And Ukrainian emergency services released footage that it said showed several buildings reduced to rubble in the aftermath of missile strikes in the southern port of Odessa. According to the local city council, missiles struck tourist sites, destroying 5 buildings and injuring 2 persons. There were no immediate reports of other casualties. Ukrainian officials said the missiles had been fired from the Russian-controlled Crimea Peninsula. Meanwhile, European Council President Charles Michel inspected a building in Odessa that was damaged by bombing during a visit. The Russian Defense Ministry says that its forces have destroyed a U.S.-made counter-battery radar station near the eastern Ukrainian town of Zylat. The United States and other NATO allies had been supplying increasingly heavier and more sophisticated weapons to help Ukraine defend itself from Russian forces that entered the country on February the 24th in what Moscow called a special military operation. And has no plans to close its embassies and around Europe in retaliation for measures the West has imposed on it over its actions in Ukraine. Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko says this is not in our tradition. Therefore, we believe that the work of diplomatic representatives' office is important. Western nations have imposed a range of punitive measures, including sanctioning key Russian officials, freezing the assets of the Russian central bank, and banning Russian oil imports to push Moscow to end its military offensive in Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden has signed into law the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act of 2022. The law makes it easier to export military equipment to Ukraine, reviving the Lend-Lease Act that helped defeat Hitler during World War II. Among other provisions, the Lend-Lease allows the United States to provide equipment to Ukraine now with just a technical requirement to pay at some later date, essentially giving it to the Kiev government. The U.S. Congressional Democrats had also agreed on a proposal to provide $39.8 billion in additional aid for Ukraine. 2 sources familiar with the proposal said, exceeding Joe Biden's request last month for $33 billion. The House of Representatives could vote on the plan as early as today. Meanwhile, Ukrainian leaders have welcomed the U.S. president's signing of the bill that will streamline American military aid to Ukraine and other Eastern European allies. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeted that he was grateful to Mr. Biden and the American people for, quote, supporting Ukraine in the fight for freedom and future, saying it was indeed a historic step.
I'm signing a bill that provides another important tool in our efforts to support the government of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in their fight to defend their country and their democracy against Putin's brutal war. And it is brutal. I want to thank members of Congress here for getting this passed and everyone who supported the bill. And the bill demonstrates the support for Ukraine is pivotal at this moment. Every day, Ukrainians pay with their lives, and they fight along the atrocities that the Russians are engaging in are just beyond the pale. And the cost of the fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is even more costly. That's why we're staying in this. Yesterday, we celebrated VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, marking the end of a transition of the devastation as a consequence of World War II, and Allied nations' defeat of the scourge of fascism in Europe. And today, Europe is honoring another important day, on anniversary. On May 9th, 1950, just years after the end of World War II, Europe began to work to strengthen the bonds of unity among the nations, particularly economic unity and the shared economic prosperity. The idea ultimately grew into what is now 27-nation European Union, an economic powerhouse and a global force for peace and close partners on all the issues we face. And it really has, I've said from the very beginning, it's something that is good for everyone. It brings these countries together in ways that when they cooperate closely economically, they also cooperate in other ways. And you've seen it in their support for Ukraine.
And Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby says that the United States has seen indications that some Ukrainians have been moved to Russia against their will. During his daily briefing, Mr. Kirby spoke of camps where Ukrainians are being held, and while he rejected talking about the number of camps or the conditions in there, he called the action unconscionable. Last week, Russia's defense ministry said more than 11,500 people, including 1,847 children, were transported from Ukraine into Russia without the participation of Kiev's authorities. Russia says the people have been evacuated on their own request, while Ukraine has said Moscow has forcefully deported thousands of people to Russia since the war's beginning.
Every time you think, we certainly have seen indications that Ukrainians are being moved from Ukraine into Russia. I can't speak to how many camps or what they look like. I mean, I don't know that we have that level of detail, but we do have indications that Ukrainians are being taken against their will into Russia. Again, unconscionable, not the behavior of responsible power. Certainly another indication that he simply won't accept and respect Ukrainian sovereignty and that they are citizens of another nation. Again, you don't have to look very far to see evidence of Russian brutality here continued. We're on day 75, which means 75 days of brutalizing the nation of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Every time you think they just can't fall to a new low, they prove you wrong.
Meanwhile, Europe must learn from its past mistakes and make sure no side is humiliated when Russia and Ukraine negotiate for peace. This statement was made by France's President Emmanuel Macron after he described Vladimir Putin's World War II anniversary speech as intimidation and warlike. Speaking to reporters in the European Parliament, Mr. Macron said the May 9th anniversary was marked by two different phases. He says on the one hand, Mr. Putin had sought to show force, intimidation, and deliver a resolutely warlike speech, while on the other, the European Union was working on deepening a peaceful project led by the people. However, he warned that while Europe was now helping Ukraine, there would come a time when Moscow and Kiev would sue for peace, and that at that point, neither side should be humiliated or excluded, as had happened to Germany in 1918. And speaking about the United Nations and joint actions for peace, the United Nations Human Rights Council will hold a special session on Ukraine this week after Kiev called for a review of the situation there. That's according to Rolando Gomez, the spokesperson. This comes after Yevgenia Filipenko, Ukraine's ambassador to the United Nations, wrote a letter urging it to consider recent reports of war crimes and large-scale violations in the town of Bucha and ongoing reports of mass casualties in the city of Mariupol. The meeting, which is expected to take place on Thursday, could include a resolution tasking the newly formed Commission of Inquiry into the war, which provided a detailed report to the Council later this year. And the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has visited Moldova for talks on Ukraine and Transnistria with Prime Minister Natalia Gavrilita. Guterres said the United Nations was committed to supporting Moldova during this difficult time when many Ukrainian refugees had fled the country. Moldovan Prime Minister Gavrilita expressed solidarity with Ukraine. Fears have increased in recent days that Moldova could be drawn into the conflict in neighboring Ukraine after pro-Russian separatists in Moldova's Transnistria region blamed Kiev for what they said were shootings, explosions, and cross-border drone incursions.
The United Nations is committed to supporting not only the people of Ukraine, but also the people of Moldova during these difficult times. Your sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity and the solid progress you have made over the past 3 decades must not be threatened or undermined. Moldova is not just another country receiving refugees. The most fragile of Ukraine's neighbors, Moldova is by far the country that has received the most refugees as a proportion of its own population. Moldova needs and deserves massive support, including budget support, to match its generosity and to preserve stability.
Madam Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's talk now to security expert David Otto, who joins us virtually. Good morning, David. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
The conflict, in spite of efforts to prevent it from going that way, seems to be spreading. Other countries and other places that were not part of it at the start on February the 24th are being drawn in one way or the other. One example is Moldova. There's statelet within Moldova where you have Transnistria and there are Russians there as well. So are we seeing the slow but inexorable spread of this conflict to other places, do you think?
Inevitably, that's very correct. And as you see, and as you said earlier on, that's why the UN Secretary General is quite concerned about the spread of the conflict. So perhaps, the more the war drags on, the more it will gradually spill over into other territories. And I think this is the biggest concern that was also indicated by the French President Emmanuel Macron, that I think rather than escalating the conflict, we should be looking towards some kind of a peaceful resolution, because as we've seen in the May 9th anniversary, which the Russians celebrated yesterday, they're not backing down. It was a pure show of force. It was also a demonstration that Russia will continue to carry out its offensive in Ukraine. So I think we're looking towards a spread of the conflict if the status quo remains the same.
The last time I spoke to you, of course, we did discuss strategy as well. And one of the things you told me then was that there was an attempt to suck a lot of willpower out of Russia, both militarily and economically, by the conflict in Ukraine, which is why the Western powers, NATO and the EU, were pouring weapons and all kinds of equipment into Ukraine to help. But from what you said now, it does appear as if while that is still ongoing, even this morning we're hearing about more money voted by the United States for Ukraine. While all that is going on, the facts on the ground show that the destruction of both lives and property and all that is ongoing, and that, like you say, perhaps it's time to explore the peaceful angle.
Very much so. If Russia is a big country as compared to Ukraine, and as you rightly said, we've seen an increase in the level of support, military-wise, and also in terms of financial resources, which is being provided by the likes of NATO members and the United States, giving that to Ukraine. This keeps dragging the war, and then Russia pounces much harder, onto Ukrainian infrastructure, because of course the narrative is that, that's from Russia's side, is that perhaps, they are targeting areas where arms and ammunition that are being sent from the West are being stored. Without those areas as civilian, inhabited areas, Russia doesn't, seem to care. But what is very clear is that, the America and the West and NATO, they want to drag this war for a very long time and make sure that, it can impact on the finances of Russia, it can impact on its stability, but also on the morale of the troops, because the longer you fight, the more disillusioned you become, because of course, then you don't have that strategic victory or that quick win, which you then envisage in the beginning. So this is very complex. And I do heed to the call of France that, this shouldn't get to a point where one side or the other gets humiliated, as we saw in 1918 after the First World War. I believe that we can still rescue the situation as it is.
Let's take a look at some of the surrounding countries and what's going on in some of those countries, at the likes of Poland, the likes of Hungary, Romania, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and so on. What is going on in Ukraine serves, taking it from the angle of security, where you are an expert, serves as a lesson of different types to all those countries, which is that, if you share a border with Russia, then you better take what Russia thinks into consideration, even if you are being given security guarantees from elsewhere. Do you see more and more some of those countries fighting to get into NATO, particularly not the EU, into NATO, which is the military alliance, in order to, quote and unquote, provide an umbrella against the possibility of Russian aggression?
I think these countries are faced with a dilemma, to be honest with you. One is, if they select to join NATO, then they should expect that what is happening to Ukraine is possibly going to happen to them. And then the other side is, if they don't join, then their sovereignty is also being threatened. But I don't think we should escalate matters, any further. The Minsk agreement made it very clear that the NATO borders should not be shifted an inch further. And I don't think it would be in the global interest of national or international security to then encourage any of these nations, be it Moldova, Sweden, or any of them, or Romania, to then go and join NATO, because of course, what is the essence of that? It's simply provocation, and what we don't need is provoking Russia any further. So I would lean towards the angle that this should end in Ukraine, and it shouldn't be something where Russia should be pushed to the wall, and perhaps they can then think about deploying any of their nuclear arsenals. So I think it's high time we understand that Russia will not take any more encroachment of NATO into any of the territories that share its boundaries.
Before I let you go, I must ask you about yesterday's parade. There were a lot of people. These parades usually, before yesterday, these parades usually are an opportunity, particularly for Russia, to unveil new weapons and what they've been working on. But that got lost in all the shuffle of so many people expecting a major announcement from President Putin, which didn't happen. But did you see anything yesterday that gave you, as an expert in security, cause for pause among the items that were on display? From a layman's point of view, we don't know what those things were. We just saw trucks. But in terms of weaponry, did you see anything that could give you cause for pause that this could be a long drawn-out battle and that the number of casualties could go even higher?
I think what Russia was, displaying yesterday was what you call a quantity kind of assurance, in the sense that it still has, weapons and mass, and then of course it still has, the military force that could be deployed at any time. So it was demonstrating to the world that, listen, we still have the power, not necessarily the sophistication of the weapons, that it could deploy. We've seen all the weapon typology that have already been used. So I think what the clear message from Russia was that, listen, we still have the manpower, we still have the support of the military, and then we still have the arsenal, to deploy. So we are not finished. As a matter of fact, we can go even further. And this is why the French president called this some kind of an intimidation, because indeed it was an intimidation.
Yeah, I mean, when you see quite a lot of soldiers, when you talked earlier in the interview about morale and so on, what we saw yesterday, some of the pictures, of course, being on the screen across the world, showing the Russians, masses of them. This picture on your screen, of course, is from neighboring Belarus, which is an ally of Russia and has been participating in this conflict. It doesn't give you confidence that anybody is stepping back anytime soon.
No, it doesn't. I mean, as a matter of fact, I think people underestimate the strength of the Russian, military and all that compared to Ukraine, and that is why, despite the massive support that is coming from, from NATO and from the West, it still has to end up in small Ukraine. So it's not like the war is being dragged out of Ukraine, and that is where I think the Russians don't want to get to, a situation where they have to fight in multiple countries against or directly with NATO members. As long as the war remains in Ukraine and these weapons are being given to Ukraine or finances given to Ukraine, Russia will continue to hammer them very, very hard. And that is why, for the interest of international security, for the interest of the Ukrainians and for the interest of Russia, I think we should be looking towards a negotiated settlement. Unfortunately, the UN's wings are clipped because it does seem to be unable to either convince Russia or convince Ukraine or NATO members to back down.
Indeed. David Otto, thank you so much for your perspective this morning. We'll be getting back to you, of course, as the days go by to update us on what is going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
After the break, Ukraine's prime minister says his country is losing $170 million per day due to the blockade from the sea. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Ukrainian soldiers on the front line in the northern Kharkiv region fired mortar rounds as Russian forces continued their attacks across the country. Kharkiv region has experienced intense bombardment as Russia renews a push in the east of the country. Over the past week, Ukrainian troops have recaptured several villages in Kharkiv region from Russian troops. The Ukrainian military says Russia is holding back some of its forces within its borders to prevent a Ukrainian counterattack that has made some headway east of Kharkiv. Meanwhile, Denis Pushilin, the separatist leader of eastern Ukraine's Donetsk People's Republic, led events celebrating Victory Day, the 77th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II in what he called liberated Mariupol. After the Russian national anthem was played and a flame symbolizing eternal light was lit, Pushilin headed a procession with a huge St. George's ribbon widely worn by Kremlin supporters. The march took place across several blocks and damaged by heavy fighting. Valentina Lisitsa, a widely known Ukrainian-American pianist who flew to Mariupol from Moscow, where she now resides, said Ukraine and some other former Soviet republics outlawed the St. George's ribbon, but that for them it's a small part of what's left of the people's heroism and a united Russia. Ukraine's president says that trade at the country's ports was at a standstill and urged the international community to take immediate steps to end a Russian blockade to allow wheat shipments and prevent a global food crisis. Volodymyr Zelensky made the comments after speaking to Europe Council President Charles Michel, who was visiting Odessa, the major Black Sea port for exporting agricultural products, where missiles struck tourist sites and destroyed buildings. For the first time in decades, in Odessa, there's no regular movement of the merchant fleet. There's no routine port work. This has probably never happened in Odessa since World War II. That's according to Zelensky, who was speaking in a late-night video address. Ukraine was the world's fourth largest exporter of maize in the 2021 season and the number 6 wheat exporter, according to International Grains Council data. But nearly 25 million tons of grains are now stocked in Ukraine, according to the UN Food Agency. He did not specify what measures he was seeking. NATO countries, including the United States, have ruled out armed intervention for fear of triggering a wider war. Japan has expanded sanctions against Russia, freezing the assets of more than 130 people, including a Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. Japan's foreign ministry said in a statement that the new sanctions targeted 8 Russian citizens and 133 members of the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine. The list includes Mishustin, oligarch Vladimir Bogdanov, and the family members of the oligarch Gennady Timoshenko, according to the ministry. It's unknown whether these officials hold assets in Japan. Japan also expanded its export ban to 71 additional Russian organizations, including manufacturers and research institutes. Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal says it loses $170 million every day that it is cut off from the sea, adding that 90 million tons of agricultural produce, which Ukraine plans to export to countries in Asia, Africa, and Europe, have been blocked. He was speaking in the southern city of Odessa alongside Charles Michel, the European Council president. The United States indicated in a broadcast that it would suspend tariffs on Ukrainian steel for 1 year, citing the damage the war has done to the industry. In 2018, then U.S. President Donald Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel imports from countries including Ukraine. The U.S. agreed to ease the Trump-era tariffs on UK steel and aluminum shipments in March. This followed earlier deals with the European Union and Japan over the controversial taxes. Let's talk to Laddie Williams, business correspondent. Laddie, this is, I don't know whether I want to call it good news for Ukraine, because even though tariffs are being lifted, but there's no way of exporting the product on which the tariffs are being lifted. Exactly. Because even on the same bulletin today, we understand that Ukraine is blockaded. So, and they're losing about $170 million a day, because of these the blockade. Blockade. Well, some analysts are saying, this steel tariffs, the removal of the tariffs on steel by the U.S. They're saying it's more of symbolic, because at the end of the day, the U.S. imports about 130,000 tons of steel, from Ukraine. So it's not that much, to bolster their revenue to the level that U.S. That could make a difference. That could make a difference. So it's mostly symbolic, at this point, showing that they are behind Ukraine. The U.S. and the allies are sanctioning Russia, making sure Russia cannot sell, most of their exports. Including steel, incidentally. Including steel. Because the other story is that there's a 70% tariff from the UK. Exactly. On Russian steel. On Russian steel, yeah. So at the end of the day, these countries are supporting Ukraine, to try and bolster their exports, which is hard, because of the blockade. The blockades with their exports. But at the end of the day, they're trying to also make sure that Russia cannot sell most of their exports also, and putting more import tariffs. The UK now has also added to those sanctions on Russia by stopping companies that render some of these financial services, to stop rendering those services to Russia, services like accounting and other business services that that Russian companies actually rely on to make sure their businesses continue to work. Yeah. Now let's bring this home, because anytime we talk about this, I guess many Nigerians have their ears pricked. Oil prices are slumping. and it does appear as if, depending on who you talk to, that could be good and bad news.
Exactly, because for me, oil prices going down is good news, because at the end of the day, oil prices go down, energy costs will also go down, which will also help, reining, inflation, because at the end of the day, these rising energy costs is stoking, inflation, at this point. So at the end of the day, right now, the issue is we're seeing the EU now not able to, embargo Russian oil. There's no unanimous, there's no concession right now on how they can actually make this a reality, because we know how much, most of these European countries actually depend on, Russian oil and gas. So they are divided, the EU on that. So at the end of the day, the market is looking at this and say, you know what, it appears there won't be, disruptions, with Russian oil at this point. So we're seeing prices actually come down, because anytime there's a disruption to Russian oil supply, we've seen prices actually react to that by spiking.
Right.
But now there's also the demand issue from China, which is the biggest importer of oil. We're seeing the lockdowns, with
as a result of COVID. Yes.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, all of that works to bring down the prices of oil, which obviously we know Biden is a fan of that. He wants oil prices to come down.
Yes, definitely. So definitely this should make him and the United States a bit happy.
Exactly.
The other thing, of course, is not depending on who you talk to. This is actually not good news. And that is JP Morgan saying emerging market economic growth will slow sharply this quarter.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, still the war in Ukraine, we've seen how that has led to supply disruptions. We've seen how we've seen how grains are not able to, come to most parts of Africa.
There's a lot stuck.
Everything is stuck at the ports at this point. So, they've checked all of these out coupled with what's happening in China and rates. We're seeing the US Fed actually raise rates by 50 basis points at each meeting. They've done that at the last meeting. But, at the end, they're expecting a more aggressive rate hike, from the U.S.
Again, because of inflation.
Again, because of inflation. So at the end of the day, they've looked at all of this, and with the dollar, strengthening to new highs, we're seeing emerging market currencies actually suffer because of this. And obviously that's because we're seeing traders and, investors run into the safe haven, which is the U.S. dollar. We've seen how markets are reacting right now. Right. Again, we saw another plunge yesterday, with the NASDAQ. That one's down about 4% yesterday. We saw the S&P 500 down. We saw the Dow Jones Industrial Average down. So as an investor, you're seeing all of this happen, and you want to run into a safe haven. So the U.S. dollar is the safe haven, and we're seeing how that is strengthening, the U.S. dollar against other basket of, currencies in the market. So at the end of the day, JP Morgan is looking at all of this, saying, you know what, emerging markets are going to suffer. They're going to feel the impact of this, going forward. We've seen how Egypt now, they're not getting these grains. Although Africans are kind of, finding ways substitutes to,
absolutely,
to wheat, and, trying to make sure they still get their bread and, other condiments out. So it's bleak, if this war carries on, and that's why it'll be better if this war can actually end.
Can come to an end.
Yeah. So
before I let you go, I must ask, of course, about the cryptos.
Wow.
We had that discussion yesterday and then on Friday. How are they doing? Because
the bloodbath continues, yes. One of my guests called it a carnage, in that market. And we know that risky assets actually get hit the most, and we know how risky Bitcoin is. Even though Bitcoin is supposed to be a hedge, against inflation, some guy said, I saw on social media, I said, well, I bought a Bitcoin at the highs of about $57,000 per coin. which was supposed to be a hedge, against inflation, but now I'm down 50% from that high. So tell me, how does that?
How is that a hedge?
How is that a hedge? So at the end of the day, we're seeing that correlation between, the tech-heavy NASDAQ and Bitcoin. Whatever happens with the NASDAQ, we're seeing it actually trickle down into Bitcoin. When there's sell-offs there, we're seeing, Bitcoin get hammered down.
Right.
It's trading about 32,000 this morning.
Yeah, that's just about half.
Far from the highs, the recent high about 39,000. So it's if you're seeing a crypto trader right now, they might not be the happiest.
They don't look
traders.
happy at all. I've seen quite a number.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ladi. We keep an eye on this, and of course, Business Morning continues to keep an eye on that, as well as Business Incorporated. Thank you. Let's talk to Mr. Sonny Ekuwusi, International Affairs Analyst. He joins us virtually from some part of Lagos. Good morning to you, Mr. Ekuwusi. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Morning to you. Happy to be here.
Let's take a look at it. Everybody, there seems to be now some kind of growing consensus about this, that things would be better if the war ended. Laddie Williams, who was on set with me just a moment ago, was saying that seems to be the growing consensus from business. David Otto, from the security perspective, also says the same thing. What do you think?
Yes, of course, I think the same. I completely agree. The war should be brought to an end because, humanitarianism is a part in which we must not be performed in our effort to win the human race. Considering the humanitarian issues in the Russia-Ukraine war, number of people who have died, who are dying, and number of children and women who are stranded, I think the war should be brought to an end. Unfortunately, the G7 leaders are not doing that. Instead of trying to bring the war to an end, they are escalating the war, they are fueling the war, and Pentagon has just announced that it has increased the fund to Ukraine to buy arms to $40 billion. That is terrible, because France is doing the same. Macron has also announced that he's supporting Ukraine, and UK, and so on and so forth. I think the thing should not be to escalate the war. I think they should try to play a federal role in order to bring the war to an end. Putin does not want to be humiliated. You can see that Putin understands that the US is fighting a proxy war against Russia. It's using Ukraine to fight Russia. And also, Putin also thinks that UK is also fighting a proxy war. So Putin does not want to lose the war, does not want to lose face. I can use the word lose face. So what this country should do is to get Putin to the discussion table, to spoil him, if I want to use that language, to spoil him, and it's okay, fine, let's bring this war to an end. You are going to get this, you are going to get that, but not continue to abuse him, to insult him. If they continue to insult him or abuse him, this war will definitely not come to an end. This is the 77 of the war, if I'm right. There's 75 or 77 of the war. And I'm afraid that a time may come that Russia, they want to use the nuclear armament. And if it does that, the world is going to be in for it. Finally, I think that we are seeing a new world order that may not be good for everyone, in the sense that these leaders are fueling the war, they're escalating the war by insulting Putin. I'm not saying that Putin is right, of course, it's not right. By invading by invading Ukraine, of course, Putin is not right. But to bring the war to an end, you need to come down and talk to Putin, the role that Pope Francis was going to play, or is trying to play, to more or less speak with him, to let everything go. This is the nature of mediation. If you are mediating, there's no winner, there's no loser. It's a win-win situation.
Basically, you're in agreement then with what President Macron has said already. But let's take a look at the concept that you identified at the start of your answer, which is the humanitarian aspect of it. I mean, there's the war going on, the armaments being used, infrastructure being destroyed, but then, of course, people are affected, and not just those who are killed, those who have had to flee, those who have left and had to go to other countries with possibly no belongings, leaving their life savings and every other thing about them behind, those who are separated from family members and all of that. Given the contacts and information that you have, that seems to have fallen off the radar, particularly in terms of media coverage. But is it still as bad as it was when I spoke to you last?
Oh, it is. It's not bad. I mean, this morning, for instance, you can hear, yesterday, I think a school was shelled, was bombed, completely bombed by Russia in Ukraine. And you can see children and women crying. This morning, again, I saw a gory picture of that nature. It is so bad. And don't forget that after this war, we're going to spend years, trying to reconcile or trying to accommodate people who have been displaced by the war. And so it is something that is terrible. And we need to look at the fact that we are all members of the human family, okay? We are all brothers and sisters, whether we like it or not. We are human beings, we are not animals. These people who are being killed are human beings, people who are displaced are human beings. That's why I'm insisting that if the G does look at it from the humanitarian angle, it will do everything possible to bring this war to an end. Like I said, in a war, everybody loses. We are still regretting the Second World War and the First World War. We are still counting our losses. In every war, everybody loses. And that's why we have to look at the economic blockage. Everybody is suffering it. It's not going to be only Russia, it's not going to be only Ukraine. But sooner or later, Nigeria, everyone will be suffering it. And that's why we are saying that war is very dangerous. You can see now Putin has been, he has been so much offended, is very much annoyed, is very much angry, is almost, as far as he's concerned, it doesn't matter if he commits suicide in this war, if everybody dies. And that's the angle I'm going, that if these people know where we are going, they should do everything possible to bring this war to an end. Luckily or fortunately, the United Nations Human Rights Council is meeting on Thursday, 2 days from now. And I want in that meeting, they should discuss how this war, how to mellow down on how to pet, if you want to use the word pet, Putin, so that he can calm down. He's a human being, and they go to him and say, please, in all sincerity, what can you do to bring this war down? Even if it means allowing him to have certain rights in Ukraine at the moment, the place where he's occupying, like I said, in this type of settlement, it's 50-50. It's not about abusing Ukraine, abusing Putin. It's not about talking about international law. International law has failed us. It has failed us because the United Nations is supposed to protect peace and security of the world since 1945. But it has not succeeded in doing that. International law, as far as I'm concerned, has failed us. The United Nations has failed us. So what we'll be talking now is about pleading with the combatants to stop this war, because it's the best interest of. Sanctions has not worked. The more you put sanctions on Russia, the more Putin is determined to win the war, so to say, okay? And the more these leaders are, supporting Ukraine, the more they are giving them ammunition and funds to buy ammunition, the more the war continues to linger. And we pray that it does not lead to a third world war where we are going. And it does not lead to a situation where Putin will say, look, this is the last resort, I have to use the nuclear armament. I don't care what is happening.
Indeed, we all hope and pray we don't get to that point of the nuclear Armageddon. Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Sonny Ekwewusi, for your time this morning. It's been it's a privilege to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
After the break, a Ukrainian mother reunites with police officer's son after 74 days. Please stay on with us.
It begins when news breaks, but there's much more in the details. That's where Special Report comes into the picture, locating source and destination of the news.
Something needs to be done. We don't need to negotiate that. Government should see what we are doing.
Bringing your perspective to the fore.
If those arrested are those protesting against police brutality, I would say that such arrest is unjustified.
Exploring angles that may provide solutions, giving you the opportunity to understand the issues and make decisions. Watch Special Report on Channels Television. Stay connected to the world with Channels TV Podcast and get all the trending stories. Simply log on to channelstv.com. Click on Podcast, select the program of your choice, and listen. Our podcast is available on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Tap the expertise you trust. Touch the stories that touch you. Anytime, anywhere.
President Vladimir Putin, as you probably heard in the course of today, had told a huge military parade in Moscow's Red Square yesterday that Russian troops in eastern Ukraine are, quote and unquote, defending the motherland. He says the invasion of Ukraine, what he called a special military operation, was necessary and had been provoked by the West. Here are the happenings about what happened yesterday in the war.
We begin outside Ukraine, where the European Union lit up its Brussels headquarters in the colors of the Ukrainian flag on Sunday, the eve of Europe Day. The Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, said on Twitter that our buildings are shining bright with the colors of the Ukrainian flag, shining as bright as our hope to see peace return to Europe and to start weaving our common future with our Ukrainian friends. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky commemorates victory over Nazi Germany in World War II and says his country would win in its war with Russia and would not cede any territory.
On the day of the victory over Nazism, we are fighting for a new victory. The road to it is difficult, but we have no doubt that we will win. What is our advantage over the enemy? We are smarter by one book. This is the textbook on the history of Ukraine. We would not know grief if all our enemies could read and draw the right conclusions.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian fighters at the besieged Azovstal steel plant in the southeastern port of Mariupol, who are the last holdout against Russian forces in the city, have vowed to continue their stand as long as they are alive. Ilya Samoilenko, a fighter with the Azov regiment who also took part in the virtual conference, said they still had weapons, munitions and water and were prepared to fight as long as they must.
And we respectfully understand that the politicians and the other people, civilian people, they have their priorities. We respectfully understand that the politicians have their ratings, have their careers, have their national priorities, of course. They also do this. National security concerns, but we also know the truth. The truth is that we are unique because nobody expected that we will last so long, and we're still lasting, we're still holding. That's the most interesting fact, because our government actually failed the defense of the Mariupol. failed the preparation of the defense of Mariupol.
Russia's defense ministry, on the other hand, says its forces has destroyed a US-made counter-battery radar station near the eastern Ukrainian town of Zolot. The US and other NATO allies have been supplying increasingly heavy weapons to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian forces that entered in February.
A mass has been held to pray for peace in Ukraine on Europe Day at the Rome Church, led by Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The mass at the Santa Sofia Church, a religious and cultural center for Ukrainian expatriates, was hosted by the EU's ambassador to the Holy See and attended by European ambassadors to the Vatican and members of the Ukrainian community. Ukraine's ambassador to the Holy See, Andrei Yurash, said this show of solidarity and support from Europe was extremely important from Ukrainians. Ukraine marks Victory Day on May 9, but as it has turned westward to Europe since 2014, it has also instituted a day of remembrance and reconciliation on May 8th, the day France, Britain, and the United States mark as Victory in Europe Day.
The European ambassadors, European Union shows that Ukraine is already in the heart of Europe. Ukraine is a part of Europe. Ukrainians are a part of the European community. So for us, it's a great gesture of our support from the side of European Union.
Yes, well, today is Europe Day. It's the day we celebrate the unity of Europe, solidarity of Europe, but also that it started as a peace project. So I think this is to give attention to what is happening in Ukraine, the Russian invasion there, and that to show our solidarity with the Ukrainian people that fight for their freedom, but also for ours, I think is very important.
The Eiffel Tower in Paris lit up in the national blue and yellow colors of Ukraine last night to show solidarity with the war-torn country and its people. The light show, requested by the French presidency of the EU, was held on Europe Day. France currently chairs the rotating presidency of the Council of the European Union. Recently re-elected French President Emmanuel Macron joined German Chancellor Olaf Scholz at the Berlin landmark at the Brandenburg Gate was illuminated as well in the colors of the Ukrainian flag. Both leaders had reiterated their solidarity with Ukraine at an earlier news conference and called on Mr. Putin to de-escalate the situation quickly. Both Mr. Scholz and Macron also confirmed their support for a stronger European Union, with Mr. Scholz saying that Germany would not be the country to veto increased EU sovereignty and cohesion. In sports, Olympic gold medalist Nikita Nagorny had participated in Russia's Victory Day parade in Moscow as Vladimir Putin claimed Russian troops were defending the motherland through the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. The Moscow Victory Day rally parade is held annually on Red Square, with the event commemorating Nazi Germany's surrender to the Red Army in 1945. Nagorny participated in the parade as part of the Young Army Cadets National Movement and has been the head of that movement since 2020. Numerous other Russian sportsmen were also in attendance. The tearful moment, a Ukrainian mother was reunited with her police officer son after 74 days apart, was caught on camera by his colleagues. The video released on Facebook by the patrol police of Kharkiv region shows officers gather around the gated building in the village of Cherskuni in Kharkiv, with one officer comforting the mother in Russian by saying, there, she opens the door. Her son is then seen walking towards her, and the pair embrace with a long hug, while the mother can be heard sobbing in his arms. Another woman then later joined the pair's embrace. The patrol officer, named as Patrolman Andriy Sikolenko, in the video's caption said the occupiers separated the policeman from his family for 74 long days, for most of which there was no contact with his mother, Helena Vasilieva. Well, that at least had a good ending at this point. Thank you for joining us. That's our coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine this morning. I'm Ladi Akere-Doluale. There'll be an update at 5 o'clock later on in the evening within our program, The World Today. But for now, do have a good day ahead.